Hey, everybody, welcome back to the RGR Football Channel. My name is Daniel Harms, and today we have quite a bit to talk about in terms of the last week, probably or so, that we've been talking. The whole Frank Clark stuff has happened. He's been officially charged. I believe this was for the first incident in March, not yet for the one in the beginning of or in June. So we're still waiting to hear on that. But people have taken to Twitter to really get their feelings out, air their frustrations. And I think that what we can really come to appreciate about this is that no one really knows what is going on with Frank Clark. People really have strong opinions about whether or not he was a huge reason the Chiefs won a Super Bowl. His contract situation, the return on that contract, everything that we've really wondered about when he was first brought to Kansas City is starting to unfold in a rather ugly way on Twitter. People pointing to anybody could make that sack against Jimmy Garoppolo in the fourth quarter to ice the game in the Super Bowl, which is a whole other thing I'll get into in this conversation. But we're going to start off with my expectations. When Frank Clark was originally brought over their trade from Seattle to Kansas City, I looked at the player. I liked the player. I'm a Michigan fan, and I liked being able to see him doing well and succeeding in the NFL. And now he was going to be on the team that I've watched, my entire life essentially since I started watching football. And I was excited about that prospect. And then I saw the contract. That really kind of opened up my eyes to what the Chiefs felt. One would draw him away from Seattle, get him on a different team with Super Bowl aspirations, and essentially lock him into what they thought was going to be a top 5 defensive end in the NFL. Now, I can honestly say that Frank Clark has not amounted to that. He's not lived up to the contract in the production on the field, um, really even continuous, consistent play. He's been a very up and down player. He does have some sacks that really aren't because he's just a really good sack artist. He does get some cleanup sacks. He's not, been leading the NFL. He's just been kind of okay in that department. But again, he's a stout run defender. And you watch these games, and typically teams will run away from Frank Clark in terms of not running directly at his edge. He's very good at setting the edge and forcing running backs back inside. So you usually see them come up the middle, go opposite, or they run some counters his way as well. They do run some traps at him, and that does seem to be what teams on offense want to do. They don't want to run at him if they don't have to. And that's useful tool because it allows you to put players like, Derek Nottie, Mike Pennell last year, the year before, Mike Dana, all these people in good positions to be able to stop the run. So they might not have had a great defense in terms of run stoppages and being able to stop the run over the last few years. But I think that they're finally starting to get some pieces that allow them to really wall off that front and make the job easier for the linebackers behind them. And I think Frank Clark was a solid starting point in that regard. You have him, you have Derek Nottie, two exceptional run defenders. They had brought in Mike Pennell 2 years, he played for the Chiefs 2 years in a row. They still hadn't had a solid defensive end on the opposite side of Frank Clark the last 2 years. It's been kind of a rotation. We've seen Alex Okafor, K-Pass, Mike Dana, a ton of really different guys over there. And I think the Chiefs have now decided that they like a guy like Mike Dana. I think that this is possible upcoming suspension for Frank Clark, whether it's going to be this year or next year, might open the door for the Chiefs to bring back Alex Okafor. That would be an option, I think. Definitely something that is in the back of their minds. I do know Melvin Ingram is an option as well. So Frank Clark has been kind of a focal point of that Chiefs defense. Maybe not because he's turned into the best defensive player. And I know that there's a lot of opinions out there that the Chiefs could have won the Super Bowl with a replacement level player and saved that money and took it somewhere else. But let's just hold off on getting to that point, and we'll just kind of talk about culture for a second, because as much as we want to think it, if D Ford doesn't go off sides against the Patriots 3 years ago, the Chiefs win that game. they go on to the Super Bowl, and I 100% believe that they would have stomped the Rams. I believe that they would have. Bob Sutton does not get fired. He doesn't get fired. That there's a whole world out there where the Chiefs probably maybe still have Bob Sutton as their defensive coordinator. Maybe not to this now at this point, but that's just that whole getting to the Super Bowl last year and winning a Super Bowl was instrumental, really, in developing this team on a defensive side. Certainly, in my opinion, we all know how BJ Kissel feels about Frank Clark. He truly believes that they don't win the Super Bowl in 2019 without Frank Clark. Now, you can talk about him having relative impact on the game, how the sack that he made against, the 49ers, the last one that he made in the Super Bowl before Kendall Fuller had that interception in the next drive. You can say, yeah, he wasn't very good. You can take still shots of him being the furthest defender away from Jimmy Garoppolo at the certain time and do whatever you want to. I don't really care. Like, if you watch the play, Chris Jones is the reason Frank Clark got that sack. Let's be honest. They were doing a stunt, and Chris Jones rammed not only himself, but the guy who was blocking him into the blocker that was on Frank Clark, allowed him to get free around his stunt and come up and sack Jimmy Garoppolo. That's what it was. Those are facts. But Steve Spagnuolo was brought in to bring in more stunts. He was brought in to bring in more of this aggressive blitzing style nature, bring more stunts. And Frank Clark is probably, if not the best stunter in this Chiefs defense. He's a very, very intelligent stunting defensive end. He's able to hug the curvature around the defensive tackle, taking that gap that he's going into, and he does a very good job of getting around quickly and hugging that gap so that the offensive lineman doesn't necessarily always see him coming. He takes that attention that defensive tackle, typically Chris Jones, has lurched himself into that gap, and he comes around looping very well. He's very good at that. I do believe that stunting has really what has gotten him a lot of these sacks, and he's a very good, what's the word I'm looking for? Really good interpreter off of them. He can fake a stunt and he can come back around. I saw him do that a couple times last season towards the end, where he really started to actually accumulate more sacks and turn on, especially in the playoffs. He had 3 sacks in the playoffs. Again, like, these things are all about what Frank Clark is. I think that he's not a guy who necessarily cares about regular season stats. He's on a team now that focuses around him. He's a culture guy. Like, culturally speaking, Frank Clark was brought in with Tyrann Mathieu to change the way that the Chiefs defense played. They got destroyed. They were one of the worst defenses ever in 2018. Like, we all know that. We watched that game. And if you want to come out here and say that he didn't have any impact on the Chiefs defense at all, I think you're absolutely full of it. And especially considering the mentality going into the game against the Titans on their way to the Super Bowl. Like, he was instrumental in that. Like, that mentality, it doesn't just come out of everybody, like one person. You have to have it be an infectious kind of guy. And Frank Clark, as much as we may not like him, some of us may not like the way that has gone about now, what's transpiring now. He's an infectious kind of guy. The team feeds off of his energy, and going into that game against Titans, I 100% believe they don't win that game without that type of mentality. I think that the defense would have been much maligned. They could have gotten Derrick Henry all over in that playoff game if Frank Clark doesn't really help instrument that mindset. That's really what it comes down to. Like, we can talk about the skills on the field and how he didn't put up a lot of sacks in the regular season. Yeah, he's just an okay player overall. He was dealing with some injuries and stuff like that. But I think that what this really comes down to is Tyrann Mathieu and Frank Clark changed the dynamic of the defense mindset. That is more impactful than just bringing in a replacement level player and using that cap space to maybe bring in another offensive player or address somewhere else. Like, I think that makes more impact. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my own personal opinion. I truly believe that they may not even win that game against Titans without Frank Clark. So If you want to come out, talk about how Frank Clark is, they could have just used a replacement level player and they would have won the Super Bowl. I think you're probably wrong about that because I truly believe that without him, they don't win the Titans game. They don't even get to the Super Bowl. I think the Titans were playing extremely well. They're running the ball over everybody. And that mindset to say, no, we're not going to back down. We're going to step up here and we're going to make, Ryan Tannehill beat us, was the mindset that won them the Super Bowl. And they did the same thing eventually down the stretch against the 49ers when their defense did play well. They were only up, what was it, 13-3? Like, it wasn't a huge gaping hole deficit they were in, and the defense was allowing them to stay in that game. And then Mahomes and Tyreek Hill found the connection. And that's when it started to click. You started to see pressures. You started to see sacks. You started to see interceptions. Like, it all feeds off of that energy that the defense gives you. Even if you go back to the Super Bowl from this past year, the defense in the first half, it was really good. It was very good. They were on their game. Frank Clark had I'm actually going to do this in my film review for tomorrow. He had a series where he got a great tackle for loss, and then he sacked Tom Brady a couple of plays later in that drive, giving the ball back to Patrick Mahomes. You may not like him. Again, I'm going to go back to this. You may not like it. You may not like what's transpiring right now, but I don't think you can deny categorically that he had no impact on the way the Chiefs defense played and allowing them to get into the Super Bowl last year, winning the Super Bowl 2 years ago. And the way that he impacts this defense is felt around everybody. It's much like Tyrann Mathieu's impact with his mentality on the secondary. The secondary has gotten much better since he's been there. And the way that the Chiefs have handled themselves defensively in the Super Bowl and in the playoffs, it's been very different on the defensive side. It's been very different. And I really believe that Frank Clark is a focal point to that. Now, let's get to the heart of this conversation, because I think we need to address that still shots are a terrible, terrible way to try to tell me that someone else can make the sack when Frank Clark made the sack. Okay. And it's one of my favorite things in the world to see someone take a still shot who's really calls themselves an analyst and says they watch tape and things like that, and just takes a still shot of something when nothing is moving. There's nothing that you don't get any context as to what happened before. And on the play in particular that Frank Clark got the sack against Jimmy Garoppolo to end that drive, it was a stunt. So he's really kind of lulling the tackle into thinking he's going to rush at some point. You have Chris Jones, or the defensive tackle, come across his face, come into that B gap and try to push the guard and the tackle away, giving Clark enough reason to come back around. So when you start here and you come back around, guess what? You're going to be behind the play. You're going to be behind the play. If you take a still shot of someone at the very apex of their loop around on a stunt, they're going to be behind everybody. So when you come in here and say something like, anybody could have made this play. Come on, let's just be real here. You wanted to take a still shot of Frank Clark behind everybody because that's where he was. And you can say, look, he was right here. Anybody could have made this play. But again, that's not the point of the play. The point of the play is the stunt and Chris Jones making an impact. If that's what you want to say it. Don't try and degrade somebody else by trying to make a bad argument and a bad example. It's not how it works. So just know that when that kind of stuff happens, if you're just trying to use a still frame image of a play in motion that's always going to be in motion, that crazy amount of things happen any given split second, it's a bad way to analyze. You can take some context and below a clip, you can use some still shots below that, or use a film to give you context. But again, still shots are a terrible way to analyze film. It's awful. Don't do it. Just use the full clips, use the video, do whatever you got to. If you have to ask someone to make it for you, go and do that. But don't take a screenshot and say, this is why this happened. Like, not going to work out for you. So let's get to this past season and the future of Frank Clark. I don't know what the future holds for Frank Clark. I think we're probably going to see some suspension come down either this year or next year. I do believe that's going to happen. especially if they get 2 charges of felony gun possession. I think that that's probably more likely he's going to get suspended. If he ends up on the commissioner's exempt list, the Chiefs do get that money, his cap hit from this year as well. So it's really kind of interesting to see how it's going to play out. Again, the gun being his bodyguards from this past one in June might have some impact on how it plays out. I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me on that. We all know that Seth and the Real Bird lawyer on Twitter are really the ones handling that right now. I know they're working on something right now for the law aspect of it, so I'm sure that'll come into play sooner rather than later. But as it pertains to Frank Clark this season, this actually the past year first, I'm a little concerned with his level of play. As much as, we watch them kind of just lull teams to sleep and come out on top eventually, I think that they have to have a different kind of mentality this year. And that comes with also all your players playing to the top of their levels. And I think that Frank Clark took a lot of time off last year, even though he played a lot of snaps. He was not as effective. He did a lot of things that I don't like to watch. Like, I just wrapped up his film review. I'll be doing that for you guys tomorrow. And I'm going to show you some things that they're going to miss if Frank Clark gets a suspension. But I'm not going to show you any of the plays that I really got frustrated with, because that's not what the point of it is. So I'm going to tell you now, there's a lot of times he's taken just all the way around the edge. He's not trying to shake anything up. He does a lot of this. It's too much, just shimmies a lot. And it frustrates me, because you have to have a plan. And it feels like he's sitting there trying to figure out what his plan is going to be. And he doesn't just take it into action. That's a big problem for me. When you're just coming around the edge and only trying to do one thing and really trying to think that you're psyching out an opponent with this shimmy stuff, it doesn't work. It does not work. They just sit there and they wait. And by the time you've decided what your plan is going to be, the ball's coming out. So you've had no impact on the play. So I've been frustrated watching him this past year. I think that 2019, he was a good player. I think he was more than an above average defensive end. And this past year, I think he was average at best. The return on the contract has not been there. Now, here's what I'll say about total returns. When you bring a guy like Frank Clark and you give him that money, what you're doing is you're trying to build a team. You're building a team. Like, it doesn't matter the contracts, everything like that. Your goal is to win a Super Bowl. Okay. So when you bring those high level players in, Tyrann Mathieu, Frank Clark, the one thing in mind is to win a Super Bowl. That's it. And guess what? The Chiefs won their Super Bowl. They went back to another Super Bowl last year. Yes, they lost, but that's back-to-back Super Bowls you went back to. That doesn't happen a lot. I feel like people kind of discredit how often that happens because the Patriots have done it for so long. Take the Patriots out of the equation. It doesn't happen. So the Chiefs doing it, winning one and going back to another one, you're going to an AFC Championship the year before, excuse me. It's kind of an important thing. And if we're just talking dollars and cents, no, he didn't pay off his contract with his play. But again, is a contract of a player, a 5-year contract for $100 million, worth the Super Bowl? I want you to ask yourself that question, because I'm going to tell you it is for me. Going to two Super Bowls, giving you a chance to win back-to-back Super Bowls. I 100% will take that. And with the salary cap exploding this next year, they had a setback with COVID. I got no issues with what Brett Veach did bringing in Frank Clark. Yeah, the contract was a lot, but again, culture changing takes a lot. And whether it's Frank Clark helping the defense get some swag against the Titans and help stop Derrick Henry from running all over them, or him getting a couple cleanup sacks in Super Bowls, guess what? I'm taking it all day, because I like to think that as much as we want to say a replacement of a player makes those plays, put Tano Passanio in that spot. Do you think he makes those sacks? Put a guy like, as much as I think Alex Okafor played well in those spots, I don't think he's as good of a stunter as Frank Clark is. I don't think he reads the game as well as Frank Clark does. I don't think he makes those plays. So if we're talking replacement of a players that are already on the Chiefs defensive end, I don't think so. And you're going to have to facilitate that kind of stuff. And again, they had to get there first. Like, this whole excuse me, this whole thing about how Frank Clark basically could be replaced by any old guy off the street, essentially, because that's what people have been insinuating. It's kind of ridiculous. He's a huge guy. Yeah, he doesn't have the bend and the speed like a lot of guys do, but that's not what Spags wants. It's not what fits his defense. Wants guys that are strong at the point of attack. And as much as Frank Clark struggled with his health the last few years, in my opinion, he was still that guy. He was still able to do this, a lot of the same things that Spags wants. This being possible the last year of his contract with the Chiefs, because there isn't out, I believe, after this year, to have him cut. I believe what we would see if he's fully healthy, we'd see the best of Frank Clark, and he might live through that contract. And the way that the Chiefs addressed the defensive end position in the draft kind of tells you that they're waiting for a defensive end, waiting for Frank Clark to really get through that, because you invest that much into a player, you're not just going to like let him go. So I really think what this comes down to is everyone's going to have their own opinions on Frank Clark, the person, and that's fine. You're more than willing to or able to have that. I'm not going to ever tell anyone to feel a specific way about, issues like this. Like it's different. He's been arrested multiple times now, so you can have the opinions you want to have about Frank Clark. But in my mind, there is zero questioning what he was able to do with that defense. I think he was a huge impact on the mindset of the defensive front players. And as much as you want to talk about possibly him just not living up to statistically his contract, I think he lived up to it with the way that he helped change the culture of this defense and the way that guys like BJ Kissel love this guy. I think that he's a huge character. We all love that interview after they beat the Titans in the 2019 season to the Super Bowl. The conversation that he had with the reporter was great. They backed up the talk that they had been talking up to then. Like, that's what you want to do. That's the kind of swag and that's the kind of attitude that you want to have as a defense, because you're going to give up points in this league. That's what it is. It's all about offense now. But when the times come down to the playoffs, everybody knows that refs get more lenient with stuff. They get more lenient all over the place. You want guys that are going to come in and play up to that level in the playoffs. And yes, it'd be nice to get you a little bit more statistical output throughout the season to kind of make sure you're ready for that. That's my own thing. That's what I'll deal with. But I think Frank Clark has had a huge impact on the mentality of this defense. Whether you want to believe it or not, this is really your own call. I truly believe that the Chiefs don't win the Super Bowl without acquiring a guy like Frank Clark and changing the culture of the defense. Because you can have good players. You can have a lot of good players. But if the culture and the mindset isn't there and people don't know what they're trying to accomplish, you're not going to get that output. I mean, look at the Packers. They've had great players on both sides of the ball for the last 2 or 3 years. They haven't gotten to a Super Bowl. I think it says a lot about Frank Clark as a person, as a kind of like a mentor, and maybe not so much mentor, but there's a word that I'm trying to think of. If you can think of it, you can go ahead and put it in there. But the way that he rubs off on the players around him and kind of a teammate, locker room guy, it says a lot about what the Chiefs think of him, as well as the way that his teammates think of him. I think that makes a lot more impact than just getting a replacement of a player and taking some of the money you would have saved and doing something else with it. And you got a Super Bowl out of it. At the end of the day, that's really what this comes down to. I think that Frank Clark had a huge impact on this team for the positive and for the better. And I don't think they win the Super Bowl without him. So that's all I'm going to say on this. So that was my rant for the day. Again, I hope this is really working out for you guys. This microphone, I really enjoy it. And I'm hoping to be able to keep this going for a long time. You guys have a great day.
Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more and subscribe to RGR Football.